You open an app on your phone. You tap a red dot on a calendar. It tells you exactly when your period is coming, down to the day. It feels modern. It feels like something only this century could invent. But the real answer is far stranger. 4,000 years ago, on the banks of the Nile, women were already doing something remarkably similar. No app, no plastic, just linen, the moon, and a stack of medical instructions carved into papyrus. How did they do it? Start with the obvious question. Did ancient Egyptian women even think of menstruation the way you do? Not exactly. They didn't have a word that split biology from magic the way modern medicine does. To them, blood leaving the body on a schedule was not shameful. It was informative. It was data. And Egyptian doctors, who were often priests as well as physicians, wrote that data down. The most direct evidence comes from a document called the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus. It was found in 1889 by British archaeologist Flinders Petrie, buried in the ruins of a town near the Fayum region. It dates to around 1800 BCE. That makes it the oldest surviving medical text focused specifically on women's health anywhere in the world. Egyptologist Francis Llewellyn Griffith translated it a few years later, and what he found surprised him. This wasn't superstition scribbled by a panicked healer. It was organized, case by case, symptom, then treatment. Menstruation shows up again and again, not as an illness, but as a vital sign. Think about what a vital sign actually is. Your pulse, your temperature, something your body does automatically that tells a doctor whether something deeper is working correctly. Egyptian physicians treated the menstrual cycle the same way. If a woman's period was irregular, painful, or absent, it wasn't ignored. It was treated as a clue pointing toward a problem somewhere else in the body. So how did they actually track it day to day? Here is where the story gets genuinely clever. Egypt didn't have paper calendars taped to the wall. What it had was the sky. The Egyptian civil calendar ran on the sun, but daily life, farming, festivals, even medicine still leaned heavily on the moon. A lunar month runs close to 29.5 days. A menstrual cycle, on average, runs close to 28. Egyptian women, along with their doctors, appear to have used the predictable rhythm of the moon as a natural tracking tool. Watch the sky. Count forward. You have a rough prediction. That single observation, that the moon and the body move in almost the same rhythm, shows up across dozens of ancient cultures completely independent of one another. Researcher John Nunn, in his detailed study, Ancient Egyptian Medicine, points out how consistently Egyptian physicians linked bodily cycles to celestial ones. It wasn't mysticism for its own sake. It was the best predictive tool available, and it actually worked reasonably well. But prediction was only half of the problem. The other half was practical. What did you actually do, physically, once your period arrived? Here, the evidence gets a little quieter, but not silent. Egyptologist Gay Robbins, who has spent decades studying the daily lives of women in ancient Egypt, notes that Egyptian women had access to an enormous supply of one particular material: linen. Egypt was the linen capital of the ancient world. It clothed pharaohs, it wrapped mummies, and in daily life, softened scraps of linen almost certainly served as absorbent cloth, washed and reused, the same basic principle behind reusable cloth pads today. There's also something stranger tucked into the medical papyri. Softened papyrus itself, along with linen, appears in Egyptian gynecological instructions as material to be used internally, for medicine, for contraception, and likely for menstrual absorption as well. Picture that for a second. 12 centuries before Rome, 32 centuries before the modern tampon was patented, Egyptian women were already experimenting with internal absorbent materials, softened and shaped by hand. Now, here comes the twist, and it's the part almost nobody expects. Menstruation in Egypt wasn't tracked only to manage a monthly inconvenience. It was tracked because Egyptian doctors used it as an early pregnancy test. The Berlin Papyrus, a related medical text, describes a method that sounds almost too advanced to be real. A woman urinates on 2 bags of grain, 1 wheat, 1 barley, over several days. If neither sprouts, she is not pregnant. If one sprouts, she is. And astonishingly, Some sprouting even claimed to predict the sex of the child. For centuries, historians dismissed this as folklore. Then, in the 1960s, actual laboratory testing was done on the method. Elevated hormone levels in the urine of pregnant women did, in a measurable number of cases, accelerate germination compared to urine from non-pregnant women. Not perfectly reliable, not modern science, but not nonsense either. A 4,000-year-old test, built entirely on observation, landed somewhere close to correct. That single fact reframes everything. Egyptian women weren't just enduring their cycles, they were reading them. A missed, delayed, or altered period wasn't just noted, it was interpreted, cross-checked, sometimes tested further. The moon told them when to expect it. Their own bodies told them when something had changed. Compare that to how menstruation gets talked about in most of history after Egypt. In ancient Greece and Rome, menstrual blood was frequently described as dangerous, polluting, something to fear. Historian Helen King, who has written extensively on ancient views of women's bodies, points out how differently Hippocratic medicine framed the same biological event, often as an imbalance to correct rather than a sign to read. Egypt, centuries earlier, had already treated the same event as clinical information. In some ways, the world took a step backward before it ever caught up again. So, why does almost none of this get taught? Partly because menstruation, even now, gets treated as a footnote in history rather than a subject worth its own chapter. Partly because so much of the physical evidence, the linen, the papyrus swabs, simply didn't survive 4,000 years the way stone monuments did. Pyramids last. Cloth does not. So the towering, permanent parts of Egypt get remembered, and the soft, private, deeply human parts quietly disappear from the record. But they didn't disappear from the texts. Scribes wrote them down because they mattered. A civilization capable of engineering pyramids to within a fraction of a degree of true north also sat down and asked, seriously, methodically, what is happening inside a woman's body, and what can it tell us? Now think about your phone again. That app with the red dot. It's built on decades of hormonal research, ultrasound data, enormous anonymized datasets from millions of users. And underneath all of that complexity, it is doing exactly one thing: predicting a cycle by watching a pattern repeat. That is precisely what an Egyptian physician was doing 38 centuries ago with nothing but the moon and a wax tablet. You didn't invent the idea of tracking your body. You inherited it. The tools changed almost beyond recognition. The instinct never did. So tonight, when that notification quietly appears on your screen, a small red circle, a gentle prediction, remember what it actually is. Not a modern convenience, not an app. It's the oldest promise medicine ever made to the human body. Watch closely enough, and it will tell you what comes next.